All right, here we go. Jemele Hill, welcome back.
I know. This is my third time? My
second time.
Second time, okay.
Second time. You were here about a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. You know, congratulations on getting married since then.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And you have a new show as well on Vice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a new show with Carrie Champion called Stick to Sports. Mm-hmm. Very much an ironic title because especially over the last, 4 or 5 years, I would say, post kind of Colin Kaepernick, there was a very loud, I would like to believe a minority that continued to tell athletes, Black athletes in particular, to just stick to sports. And certainly as these social issues became more prominent in terms of athletes discussing them, I was told to stick to sports, as was Carrie, many, many times. And so this is our way of giving a middle finger to all those people who said, stick to sports, because that's not even possible today. Yeah,
when I first heard the title, I thought, shut up and dribble.
Yes. So. Yeah. Right along the same lines, right? So yeah, it's a definitely, though this is not a sports show necessarily, it is sort of a nod to the people who were wrong about that conversation needing to end.
Yeah. And you have another show with Van Lathan about The Wire. When I read that, I'm like, wait, did I just read that wrong? Let me rub my eyes with it. Nope, that's the show.
I get paid to watch TV, right? It's like, who knew, despite that journalism degree, that this would be what I was really good at. But no, it's a fun show. Van's a great partner, and we just break down every single episode of The Wire. And it's, I think for Wire fans, people saw that when The Wire, people know this, like when The Wire was on television, it did not draw good ratings at all. And it kind of got its flowers after the series was over or toward the end of the series. So for a lot of Wire fans, they never got that satisfaction of what we saw happen with Game of Thrones, or even what we saw happen with The Sopranos, of there just being this outright community being able to discuss everything that happened on the show. And this is a way for Wire fans to do that, and even those who've always wanted to watch The Wire, because we're very careful about spoiler alerts, even though the series is as old as it is. But we want people to experience this, especially now, because one thing I realized in the rewatch is The Wire holds up exceptionally well to today, and in many issues that are discussed and broken down in The Wire, it's ahead of its time. So. Holds up amazingly well, and I'm just really happy to be involved with it.
Yeah, I think The Wire is what introduced the U.S. audience to Idris Elba.
Yeah, it is.
I'm not saying that was his first show or whatever.
Right. But that's when he became a star.
That's when he became an American star.
An American star,
he was already a British star, but I didn't even realize he was British until like way after.
Same. I did not know. Yeah, I didn't know Idris Elba was British at all while I was watching The Wire. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to think of what point I may have figured it out. I know it was before The Office. I feel like it was somewhere between after The Wire and before he started appearing on The Office. But this was a huge break in his career, and especially the type of character that he played. Mm-hmm. When you look at the kind of characters that he plays now, it just kind of speaks to his talent and versatility.
Yep. Well, I can't really start the conversation without mentioning Jacob Blake getting shot 7 times in the back by a police officer, trying to break up a fight, from what I understand. He wasn't even committing a crime. And someone sent me that video before, the rest of the world really got it. And you're just watching it going like, okay, am I missing something? Is there something in a different angle that maybe I'm not seeing? Or does this look like almost an execution in a way? When you first saw that video, what'd you think?
I tried to avoid the video because I've gotten to the point where I can't really watch those videos anymore. Because I don't want to become desensitized to it. I don't want to pretend it's normal. But also, it's just the despair, the heartbreak, being a Black person in America and knowing that every time you have any interaction with the police, your life is in jeopardy, is a very sobering feeling. It's a depressing feeling. And I don't even think the word depressing even does it justice. But because the video obviously exploded over social media, I was able to see enough of it to know what happened. And much like with George Floyd, much like with Ahmaud Arbery, and that's just 2020. I mean, we have seen this so repeatedly before social media brought more attention to these kinds of incidents, we've just become a society where the brutalization of Black bodies is the expectation. And I don't know how people can continue to watch these and it turns into a debate. That's the sickening part about it, is that Jacob Blake is fighting for his life. He's paralyzed, and there are people still debating whether or not it was justified what happened to him. That's where we are in this country, you know. And so, unfortunately, this is very much in line with history, and not just the history of policing between Black and brown communities and the police, but the history of how Black people have been treated in this country. You know, people don't like to hear it, but it is historically accurate that the police formed from slave catchers. And there is a long line of Black people being brutally punished for the smallest of infractions. And so I am often astounded by people who are searching for a justification for this, as if even if you do speak back to the police, even if you don't comply with what they say, that the just penance is being executed on the street, executed in front of your 3 children. Because even if you thought that there was a way he could have behaved differently in this interaction, was his crime, quote unquote, so bad that he deserved to be almost murdered in front of his children? And that's the part that is so in line with history, where Black people have been punished harder, sentenced harder, where anything done to us has been deemed acceptable by the law and in the eyes of too many people in this country.
Well, can you explain the slave catcher part? Because, you know, from my understanding, yes, there were slave catchers and it was a police type force, but wasn't there always police forces in America, just regular police forces to deal with average criminals?
Yes, there were. So the history of how the police started, and even, you know, when you take it back to slavery, when you talk about slave catchers, which were the original police unit, the whole mentality and the goal of slave catching is obviously to catch those who are trying to escape from their own freedom. That mentality sort of bled into the American policing system. Because when you think about how policing has typically been done in Black and brown communities, it has been to keep us contained. It has not been really about our public safety. It has been to make sure that we don't step across a certain line. Often that line is into the wider society of white America. You go to, you know, a lot of urban cities, and it's kind of the same story, where the police presence is heavier in Black neighborhoods, where the interactions are deadlier, are more physical, because that's the message that people want to send to Black America, is this is your place, right? It's not about protecting you. It's not about being a public servant to you. It's about constantly reinforcing through terror and other means that you always know what your place is in this country. And, you know, I'm just, frankly, like a lot of people, I'm really tired of hearing about how these just are a few rogue incidents, when it's really proven that this is just the systematic way of doing things. The system is not broken. The system is working just as it was intended to work.
Have you yourself had bad experiences with the police?
I have thankfully not had any bad experiences with the police, but I have plenty of friends who have, plenty of you know, my Black male friends who have been racially profiled, and racially profiled at ages that it leaves a stain on them. I mean, I'm not talking about when they're adults and could maybe mentally be better equipped to handle these kinds of confrontations, but when they are 11, 12, 14 years old, I mean, so many of them have told me about how they had a gun pulled on them by the police for small things like breaking curfew or gathering together or supposedly loitering. Again, reinforcing that constant model of telling Black people that unless they behave, which is very much a slave catcher mentality, if you step out of bounds for the smallest things, we have a right to brutalize you.
Well, for example, there's Tamir Rice. When you look at that situation, why would you assume that a 12-year-old boy would have a real gun as opposed to a toy gun? Wouldn't the initial expectation be, it's a little kid, it's probably a toy gun? But there is an interesting history in America where Black people are seen as older than what they really are. Black people don't feel pain to the same regard as their white counterparts. It sounds just silly when you say it out loud, but apparently there is very much proof to go along with this. Like I said, it's a 12-year-old kid, and you just show up and you just open fire on him. People don't mention this part enough these days, but it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And since last time the George Floyd incident happened, and which became the biggest protest in world history. But even now I'm hearing little tidbits where they're saying that the coroner is trying to say that he died from a drug overdose as opposed to having a knee on his neck for 8 minutes. And, right now you have a whole new set of riots that are happening. 2 people just got killed by a 17-year-old white kid.
Yep. With
an AK-47 who was going around just shooting people. And 1 person injured as well. It's just an ugly situation.
The 17-year-old in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that flies in the face of this fallacy that we have, that racism will just die off with a certain generation, that the younger people won't be as invested in racism as their parents or their grandparents.
Yeah.
And I have found that just not to be true, because when you look back at Charlottesville and that rally, which led to a young woman losing her life, those are not old people out there.
College students.
These are college students and young people who were there. And I think it speaks to, we assume technology would make people smarter, but technology is making people more weaponized in their beliefs.
Right, because of the whole meme culture that goes around. You look at the anti-vaxxers, you look at the 5G people and so forth, and the conspiracy theorists and so forth, that it really gets legs and starts to walk around. Whereas 30 years ago, it's just, you're looking at these people like just a crazy person, with the tinfoil on their head. But now you actually have millions of people that go along with this because there's a really cool meme. And there's a guy that looks official that's speaking with an authoritative tone in his voice. So you just run with it and it becomes viral. Doc Rivers recently spoke out about Jacob Blake. And he said, the country doesn't love us back. What did you think about that speech?
Well, I think, what Doc Rivers spoke to is something that if you're Black in this country, you felt at some point in your life. But it's also why many of us are horribly insulted at this idea that we're not patriots. It's an idea that is being constantly fed to people by our president, by people in very high leadership positions, that patriotism looks a certain way, that being a real American looks a certain way. I don't know what's more American and what's more patriotic than Black people continuing to faithfully serve this country despite most of American history being not considered to be full citizens. And when you look back at the history of wars and of various points in our country where we have lined up to serve and help this country, and our reward for that has just been continued dehumanization. It's a slap in the face for all Black people to contribute as much as we do to this society, to continue to, want this country to be better, and to be told that we're the outsiders, and to be told that we don't love this country when we have the most reason to not love it, and yet we continue to pour our soul into it anyway.
Well, this is kind of an interesting question for you. I'm a Russian Jew. At 4 years old, my entire extended family moved out of Russia into the U.S. because of the horrible treatment that Jews would get in Russia. We couldn't get into certain universities. We couldn't get into certain jobs. One of my relatives' brothers got killed when they found out that he was leaving the country. It was, it's one of those situations where after a while, my family said, there's no point in raising children in this place. And recently I interviewed this artist named Sakurdi. He's the biggest artist in Ghana, biggest rapper in Ghana. And we were talking about something called the Year of Return. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
I am familiar, yeah.
Last year was the Year of Return. It's like a movement to make people come back home. So I endorsed it because I believe in that.
The Year of Return, that's amazing.
Yes. So last year's the Year of Return. This year, I don't know if it's official, but they didn't want to keep it just last year, just being the Year of Return, because it's a whole movement. It's not going to be just a year. This is a way of thinking way forward. So I think moving on, they were trying to, the tag, I think it was beyond the return. So now it still keeps going. Like people needs to come back. You know, the lifestyle in the States, I've been there. I've been to London. I've been to Germany. I've been to, yes, God has been good. I've been to a lot of countries, but I feel our people are not living life to the fullest where they are until they return back home. And then as soon as they come back home, most of them don't want to come back. I know a lot of people that came in for just a visit, and these guys don't want to go back. You know, so it's just a sense of pride knowing that you have a home to go to as Black people.
Yeah, it was this whole thing that they set up in Ghana, I think about a year ago or so. And, you know, Idris Elba, whose mom is from Ghana, and like, you know, Boris Kodjoe and a lot of people went over there and they just talked about how, look, all this bad treatment that you're getting in America, come back to Africa where we own everything. Everyone in the government looks like us. You know, clearly there's a history of slaves being taken out of the country, you know, people being kidnapped as slaves to be taken out of the country, but it's not the same level of brutality that happened in America. Why do you think more people don't just say, I'm just going to leave America and just go to Africa?
Well, unlike many immigrants who come to America, we don't have the same relationship with Africa. That doesn't mean we shouldn't. In fact, that's one of the travesties of being brought over here as slaves, is that we lost our connections to our home countries. We lost our lineage.
Right.
We literally lost our names.
Right, but we didn't have any connections to America.
No, and you decided to come over here.
Yeah.
You were fleeing something.
We were fleeing.
Right.
But here's, you know, when you take these situations, it's kind of a similar thing. And, you know, I mean, there's the whole racist, you know, go back to Africa. That's not what I'm saying at all.
No, I know, yeah.
I'm actually saying, hey, look, you know, and for example, I just interviewed Akon, who's made millions of dollars in Africa. Like he became successful in America, became a millionaire in America. And instead of just saying, I'm going to keep putting my money over here, he started businesses in Africa. He actually did the whole Lighting Africa project, which, you know, and I just interviewed him about this. 350 million homes now have electricity, thanks to this guy.
Yeah.
How many Africans have electricity now, thanks to you?
Oh, man. I couldn't even estimate amounts, but we're literally in 16 countries now. And Africa got, man, I couldn't even tell you, bro. But we're probably close to about 350, maybe 400 million people with electricity now.
500 million people have electricity.
Yeah.
Thanks to you. Do you ever just like sit back and say, God damn, man? Because let me tell you something.
Funny, I never did before COVID. COVID kind of made me understand and realize how much impact I made in that time I was working. Because normally when you're working, you're just in tunnel vision. You don't even see what's going on and what you're accomplishing. You know?
Because I don't care how smart you are when you're born.
Right.
I don't care how intelligent, how analytic you are. If you don't have electricity, you're just going to be doing farm work.
Period.
You can't do nothing.
What can
without
you do?
What can you do without electricity?
Absolutely.
You can't even learn outside of whatever tattered books are in your village.
Right.
You can't go on the internet.
None.
You can't go. You can't Google anything. You can't look up something on YouTube.
Right. You can't do
You can't do nothing.
You can't do
I remember thinking the other day, like before Google, if two people were arguing about a fact, whoever could argue better would be the winner of that argument.
Right.
You couldn't say, well, let me look it up.
Right.
Whoever would just argue better.
Whoever had the best argument.
The best argument would win. That would become the fact.
Now you could pull up stats.
You could pull it up. A guy who grew up in Senegal.
Yeah.
You know, in a house with no electricity, who just wanted to give electricity to his grandmother because she didn't want to move into the city. And, you know, and he even said, like, everyone he knows that went over to Africa became successful, you know, from the US. So why do you think there isn't more of that type of push?
I think the reason why it's not a legitimate push for us to go back to Africa in this positive sense is because there is a disconnection, I think, between African Americans and the country of Africa. Some of it is...
Continent of Africa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting that. Sure did. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. But I think there is a lot of disconnection between African Americans here and the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with we're not comfortable admitting it, but many of us, especially those who have never been to Africa, hold perceptions and biases about what Africa is actually like, right? And I mean, I've been to South Africa. I went to Kenya on my honeymoon. I want to explore more of Africa because most of the people I know that have been to Africa, and I know plenty of my friends went on that year return trip, is that once you're there, you feel the immediate connection. It just feels good, much like it does here in America when you go to cities or to places where everybody in there looks like you. There's a sense of comfort. You're able to relax a little bit more as opposed to when you're in mixed environments, or as most of us are in environments where we're the minority. But I think a lot of us just don't have enough education about what Africa is, what it's able to offer. I think we hold some very common misperceptions about it not being civilized, about Africa, inability for us to make money there as we would here. I mean, I've said this before about this country, and it still bears to be true. America ran the greatest PR campaign in the world. All right. When people say best nation on earth, best country in the world, those are affirmations. They're not actually facts sometimes, right? But most of us...
The land of opportunity.
Land of opportunity.
Yeah.
Like, these are very positive affirmations. And this is not to suggest that our democracy has not worked in many ways, or that this hasn't been a land of opportunity for some people. Of course it has. There's no doubt about it. But the idea that we are the gold standard with these ideals is not exactly true. A lot of us have bought into the American PR campaign, and we haven't explored the world enough to know that there are other places where there is legitimately a better life. And I think a lot of us would be surprised if we had the opportunity to go to Africa about how well we would thrive there and what that would mean. I mean, and some of it is just emotional. I mean, obviously, if you're an African-American living today, you've been here your whole life. Even if you've explored the world, your way of life is here. And I don't blame people also for feeling as if, hey, I've poured this much into this country and I know it has its problems, but I feel like this is the best place for me. I don't blame them for feeling that connection. But there is something to be said that at some point, if things don't change here, if it looks like we're still kind of stuck in the same flying pattern, I would not be surprised if more African Americans here decide not just about returning to Africa, but just living abroad, period, where they feel like they may be safer and where they feel like they may have more equality.
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine, Napoleon from Tupac's group, The Outlaws, he converted to Islam and he moved his entire family to Saudi Arabia. And he couldn't be happier. He could not be happier. He knows that his kids are safe. He knows there's no drugs or guns, like the way he grew up in Jersey. No one's getting murdered around him. You know, he's had a lot of murders in his life. Yeah. From his actual parents getting murdered, like in front of him. And he has no regrets whatsoever.
I know some friends who feel that same way about Dubai.
Completely foreign country. He had to learn the language. He had to do this, but he was fully accepted. And I've been to Africa. I've been to Senegal. I've been to Egypt. I've been to Jordan, Bahrain, in Northern Africa. These are dope places. Yeah. I mean, and it also gives you a better understanding. Like, when I'd walk around Senegal for the first time, I realized how there was no tension between Black and white people because they're all comfortable. They know where that there's no inequality over there. Everyone looks the same. And one of the things that Akon said in our recent interview that got a lot of people upset was he was saying how in Senegal there's really not a focus on slavery. the way there is here.
Mhm.
And by having that on your back, he feels that Black Americans can't progress as much as they can because they always are referencing that as well.
I think it's also the art of just letting the past go and moving towards the future. And I think in the U.S., they have this stigma of just not letting go of the past and blaming the past on every mishap or, disappointment. And I think as long as you hold on to that past, it's just a lot of weight that you carry with you everywhere you go. And it's hard to move forward and move fast when you got to, weight on your back.
Right.
You just got to let it go.
A lot of people got upset over this. I don't know if this hit your radar.
Well, I understand why they got upset. Here's the thing about the legacy of slavery. And I don't think that it's that Black people have an inability to get over it. It's that the legacy is so deep that it's still existing in America.
Yeah.
We're in 2020 and we're talking about another Black man, not a Black man, not a singular incident, but just another Black man being executed on the street. And when you look at the dynamics of race, they're still very much in place from when there was slavery. I mean, certainly Black people have been able to make some gains. And to say we're fixated on slavery presumes that most of us have not been able to push ahead and be productive despite having the cloud of racism hang over us at every turn. It hasn't been like that. Black people have always exerted their will as much as they can to get out of their circumstances. But the reason the country cannot move past slavery is because we've lied so much about it and we've whitewashed it and we don't even teach what really happened in slavery. I made this point recently because I got into, I guess if you want to call it hot water, over some comments I made comparing America to Nazi Germany. And I'm trying to assume you were going to ask me about.
Yep.
But the thing that is when you go to Germany, you don't see statues of Nazis, okay? When you're in America, there are 800 Confederate monuments. These are people who were traitors. Many of them were slave owners. John Lewis, icon, civil rights hero. He got his head cracked open on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for marching for equality.
Mm-hmm.
Do people even know who Edmund Pettus is? He was the leader of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. There's a bridge named after him.
Oh, wow. I never knew that.
John Lewis is dead, but the Edmund Pettus Bridge is still very much alive. And so that's the problem with America, is that we have never confronted slavery, our racial past, in any real way. The Germans apologize. We've gotten a little bit of acknowledgement here and there, but no real comprehensive apology and restitution for what was done.
Right, because the Germans paid reparations to the Jews.
Exactly.
And financed Israel.
Yes.
A lot of people think America gave reparations to Jews. They didn't, but they did support reparations with the United Nations.
Correct.
So in a way, they sort of did. And I remember, I got into some hot water as well. I think maybe late last year, I said something to the effect of, or maybe early this year, I said something to the effect of, I support reparations for African Americans, possibly in the form of a free college education. A lot of people got upset. Your people got cash and we only get a college education.
They didn't think it was enough.
Right. And,
okay.
and what had happened was, because my thinking was, look, I got a college education. I went to UC Berkeley. I've made millions of dollars because of that education. By using what I learned in that school, I was able to apply it to different businesses over the course of my life. And, it's proven that a college graduate makes about $1 million more than a high school graduate during the course of their life. So that was my thinking. And also my thinking was, well, America's not going to cut a massive check like this to African Americans because it'll bankrupt the country. Then COVID-19 happened. And then America started cutting $1 trillion checks. And then I had to basically apologize and say, something, I was wrong. I admit that my stance was flawed because it's not that America can't cut a check for reparations. They just don't want to. Correct. So I had to basically say, okay, my bad. I have to adjust my stance now. But, that was one of the things that Akon said as well, is that he doesn't think that America will ever cut reparations. So to sit there and wait for it or to discuss it is almost a waste of time in a way. Now, I didn't agree with him. I personally think there should be reparations. What is your take on it?
We definitely, I think the only way, it's only two ways to me we move past racism in this country. One is there has got to be a meaningful apology and undoing of many of the mistakes that were made as we have tried to rectify slavery, be it the monuments that are up that are owed to slave owners, a consensus across the board, real apology to African Americans, and of course the rectifying of systems. Like, we have to be able to rectify the fact that the criminal justice system has just become the new slavery for African Americans. That needs to be dealt with. But on top of, from a structural standpoint, what needs to be done, reparations has got to be on the table. Now, that doesn't mean, look, Black people have been in this country long enough, I know this, to know that something like that is not something that we should plan into, our wealth package, into thinking like, hey, one day this check is going to arrive out of nowhere. But that doesn't mean we stop pressing for it and stop asking for it, because we have to hold this country accountable for what they've done, because they've never been held accountable. And in terms of reparations, while we may not all agree on the form in which it takes, I think it was very clear that part of a big reason why Black people struggle to build generational wealth is because so much was taken from them. And even at times in our history where we tried to create our own businesses, tried to create our own communities and our own financial sustainability, those were usually destroyed by white people. I mean, look no further than Black Wall Street. Hence why I always laugh when conservatives want to give Black people, of all people, that pull yourself up by the bootstraps speech. Well, every time we try, you guys just reinvent another form of racism. This is not just conservatives, but just the system in general that robs us from what we've created. Every single time it happens. So this idea that we're not trying hard enough is just laughable. But there has to be meaningful, not just meaningful conversation, there has to be meaningful action where this is done, whether it be in the form of education, land, actual money, because most Black people in this country don't have any generational wealth. And the real mind-blowing part of it is that in terms of generational wealth, Black people are poor today, where we technically have more advantages than we were during the time when we were still fighting for civil rights.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard about this early this month. I think it was like LA Times that published a story about the Black family who owned
Huntington Beach.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw that story.
Manhattan Beach, where they owned.
Or Manhattan Beach, sorry.
Manhattan Beach.
Yep.
Where they owned what today would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a beach designed for Black people. And Black people would come from all around California to go hang out on this beach. And then over time, they started passing little laws where you couldn't walk past this, you couldn't go here, you couldn't do there. And then ultimately, they just took the land from them, which is the generational wealth of what you're talking about. I mean, think about how much, you're talking about Southern California beachfront property.
Would that be worth today? I mean, it'd be astounding. I mean, that family got robbed of an opportunity to set up their entire family for generations to come.
Yeah. They were awarded, after suing the city, they were awarded $14,500.
So they got no justice at all.
No.
Like, not even close.
And they weren't able to get their property back.
I mean, that is exactly why I say it's like every time that, Black people have tried to have some measure of sustainability, of self-reliance, it's usually undercut by institutional racism. Yeah. It's just what it's been. I mean, Black home ownership. I was just reading a story before I came over here about how in appraisals, D.L. Hughley was in the story, about how Black homeowners, there's a systematic problem where their houses are not appraised for as much, even when they're in, very nice neighborhoods, that there's a difference. This woman, she was talking about how she knew the appraiser was coming. She's married to a white man. She decided to take down all the pictures in their house and put up his family. And she took their son to Target, and he was the one that met the appraisal. And their first appraisal fell well below market value, 40% difference when the appraiser saw it was just a white dude that lived there. And so it's like home ownership is the path to generational wealth for most people in this country. So we are met with roadblocks when it comes to loans, when it comes to appraisals. And even before this, the racism and how the GI Bill was applied during that time when the GI Bill came into play, Black soldiers were denied that. They had just went to fight for their country and they couldn't get access to the GI Bill where you saw the largest housing boom in America, right? So they missed out on being able to buy a home when white soldiers were able to buy a home that they could pass down to their children, thus establishing generational wealth. We weren't allowed to do that. So this is why reparations has to be on the table, because in economic, there's plenty of economic grievances that we have that prove what was stolen.
A lot of times when you tweet, it goes viral. So it's a trend.
It's my way of life, I guess.
Your way of life. I think the most interesting tweet that you had recently was, if you vote for Trump, you are a racist. You have no wiggle room.
I'm shocked that went viral.
Yeah. Number one, how much backlash did you get from angry Republicans once that happened?
I mean, it was the backlash was not unexpected. I mean, I knew when I tweeted that wasn't going to exactly go over well with a lot of people.
Trump supporters.
Right. Particularly Trump supporters or even conservatives in general who have done a lot of mental gymnastics to figure out a way to support this president. But I didn't really care about the reaction because we're at a point now where this stage, people may think I'm being dramatic or that people who say the same thing are being dramatic, but we are literally fighting for our democracy right now in real time.
Real time.
And people don't really understand what's at stake or they want to ignore it because they feel like they're in the right privileged class, so therefore it doesn't affect them. But I thought democracy was something that should be important to us all. We have a president that is admitting almost daily he's stealing the election, who has said he doesn't know if he's going to leave the White House if he loses. And when has that ever been acceptable? And so if you are somebody, I don't care what side of the aisle that you are on, at the very least, if we can't agree that we need free and fair elections, then what do we have? Then all this talk about being the greatest democracy on earth, the land of the free, is all bullshit if we cannot guarantee people the most basic right that there is, which is voting in a free and fair election. So at this point, saying that Donald Trump has established without a doubt that he is a white supremacist, if you're still supporting that, what does that say about you? What should I call you if not a racist? I don't know what else to call you, because he has pretty much made it blatantly clear that he believes America is only for some people, not all people. He doesn't govern all of this. He only wants to govern some of us.
Yeah, I mean, he tweeted a white power video.
He tweeted if I went down the list of things that Donald Trump has done to prove he's a racist and a white supremacist, I would literally be here all day. And that's not even touching his past, right? Yeah. And so I know people have gone into his past and they see these pictures of him with famous Black people, and I get it when Black rappers used to constantly reference Donald Trump in their songs. But that is because the easiest thing to do is to be friends with famous Black people. That's the easiest thing in the world, because often they are not seen as being like those Black people, as in those other Black people they don't really want to associate it with. This is a very talented group of Black people who, bring you social currency and social capital and make you cool. So those Black people are the easiest Black people to be around. But I think once Donald Trump saw a specific pathway to the presidency, he doubled down on it and he's committed to it and he's exposed who he is. And he is a racist. And I know it's uncomfortable to think of your president being a racist, but by the way, he wouldn't be the first racist president in the White House. Hello, Woodrow Wilson. But at the end of the day is that the longer we lie about what he actually is, the more we stay wrapped up in this fantasy that what we're experiencing and what we're seeing is not actually happening when it is. It's like democracies die not by one swift blow. They die by a death by 1,000 paper cuts. That's how they go.
Right, because I guess there was a leaked audio where Trump said that low Black turnout in 2016 was the reason that he won. Mm-hmm. And, listen, when I talk to some of my Black friends and they're like, look, we didn't have a dog in the fight in that election. You got Donald Trump on one hand, then you had Hillary Clinton, who's talking, calling black people super predators. And, when you look at Bill Clinton's, record in terms of locking black people up, it's hideous. So I think what ultimately happened is that people just didn't go and vote at all.
Oh, no, the turnout, I think it was like a 20-year low for black people.
Yeah, people just did not go and vote. And I think a lot of people feel, well, if I don't vote at all, that's like me not voting for Trump. And it's actually the exact opposite. Because Trump supporters they're going to the polls, they're bringing their friends, they're bringing their relatives, they're getting in their pickup trucks, and this is why like the whole thing with like suppressing the post office is so key, because Trump knows that his supporters are going to go and risk their lives and go to the polls.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying? Like, they're going to go. They're not going to mail in their ballots. They're going to go. It's the Democrats that are like a little more worried about dying while waiting in line and so forth. I mean, was it Herman Cain who died going to a Trump rally, who continued to tweet from his account after
afterlife? I was like, what?
After he died?
Yeah.
Like, yo, who does this?
Look, I don't give conservatives credit for much. But the one thing I have to say is, like, when they fall in line even at their own detriment.
Oh yeah.
And it is not surprising, or would not be surprising, that so many of the Trump voters aren't going to be stopped. So the only way you minimize their impact is that you have to overwhelm them with numbers.
You have to vote. You have to vote. And I know that there is the whole thing of like, well, Trump lost the popular vote last time, and look what happened with the Electoral College. Yeah. And I get it. And there's going to be a sense of pessimism.
Right.
But not voting is not going to fix it this time.
No.
Like, I registered to vote, and I even posted up my registration, like, on Twitter and Instagram, say, look, we are not going to win this if we just don't vote. And here I am. I'm registered now. You could do the same thing. And now you have Biden with the first potential black female VP, Kamala Harris. When you first found out about Kamala Harris as a black woman, how'd you feel?
Seeing her get the nomination was really inspiring, because I had a list in my head, a ranking, if you will, of things I thought I would not see in my lifetime. And I was, even though, I'm younger than my elders, I was definitely of the opinion we would not have a black president in my lifetime. Yeah. Of all the different ethnic groups and genders, I had black woman last. Like, we would not see a black woman in the White House in this kind of capacity as president or vice president. Like, just wasn't going to happen. And even though from a political standpoint, an economic standpoint, education standpoint, black women have been about their business for quite some time, there's still such major ceilings that exist for us, because we're fighting and dealing with both racism and sexism at the same time. So seeing another black woman be able to break through these hurdles, and Kamala Harris, I had her as a guest on my podcast, even said this herself, is that when you break barriers, it hurts. It's gonna hurt to do it, because you're breaking something, right? So there's some pain involved. And thinking about what she possibly went through just to get to this point, because she's been a first. This is not the first time she's a first. I mean, she was the only black woman in the Senate. I mean, there are hardly any black attorney generals, and she was one here in California. Hardly any black district attorneys. So to hold all of these positions and be one of, if not the only one of the only few, people can't possibly imagine what she's been through to get to this point and what it's taken for her to do it. And so for a lot of black women who can identify with that level of sacrifice, identify with that level of determination, it was a signal to us that all that we're doing to try to make things better for our community and family, that there is a payoff at the end. And it just shows a different picture of what leadership looks like. I mean, for the entire history of our country, I think we think only white guys are the smartest people who can run things. Clearly not true, right? But yet that's the picture of leadership in this country. And so I like that her being there is changing what we think a leader is.
Well, when she got the nomination for VP with Biden, the first thing that I started to see is she's not really black.
Yes.
She's really Indian. She's something else. She's white. She's this or that. When you first started hearing that, what'd you think?
I think, unfortunately, it's a continuation of ignorant conversations that are had in our community. Kamala Harris is not the first person of mixed heritage to have to face this. Barack Obama faced it too.
But he's half white.
Yeah, because he's half white. And I don't know what people want. If they want her to act like she has no Indian heritage, considering how lovingly she speaks of her mother, is she just supposed to deny that that's a part of her life? But she's clearly never had any problem being identified as a Black woman. She embraces it. She seizes it. I mean, the woman went to Howard, for crying out loud. She's an AKA. By most Black litmus tests, that usually gets you in, all right? And so I just found it as another way to try to knock her down a peg, because now we see what she has faced. It's like, if she's not facing racism, which is you're not Black enough, she's facing some level of misogyny that's also undercutting her achievements. And I just think in the Black community, like, we need to just stop with those kinds of conversations, because we're buying into what is the thinking of white supremacy. White supremacy created the one-drop rule, all right? White supremacy did that, right? That was not our invention.
Yeah, you're right.
And so for us to embrace that and to continue to, propel it further is really hurtful, because we can't afford, of all people, we cannot afford to take on the traits of the oppressor. And by having those conversations about Kamala Harris's Blackness, or some people's mind, lack thereof, all we're doing is exposing the fact that we have adopted the same amount of ignorance that we fight against constantly on a daily basis.
Well, the Republican National Convention is going on right now, and Herschel Walker decided to speak out for his buddy Donald Trump. It's always interesting when you have a Black person who supports Donald Trump. He's got an interesting cast. I remember D.L. Hughley said something interesting where he said that Donald Trump only accepts Black people that he could ridicule, essentially. When you look at the Kanye West of the world, or you look at those two women. Yep. Yeah. Like, when you see the people around him, this is not really the cream of the crop.
Omarosa.
Omarosa. Yeah, like it goes on and on. So it's kind of like, it's a very interesting thing. When you saw Herschel Walker get up there, and this was a phenomenal athlete at one point in his life, Heisman Trophy winner and so forth. Wasn't he working with Trump on the?
I feel like he was.
Remember, there was the XFL or the?
No, the USFL.
USFL.
Yes,
there we go.
Yes,
wasn't he one of the big players on the USFL, and
was.
Trump was one of the owners of one of the teams and so forth? So he goes back. Mm-hmm. He goes back with him. What did you think when you saw Herschel speaking like that?
Well, yeah, it was just kind of sad, because I think that, what Herschel Walker doesn't understand is that he wouldn't be speaking at the Republican National Convention. He would not be friends with Donald Trump if he were not a Black person who was considered to be an all-time great football player. He had to provide a service of entertainment. There's a long history of Black people who entertain white people, who have been let into a particular circle of white people because they entertain them. And I don't think he really understands, that relationship. Like, you're there because you used to entertain Donald Trump. That's why. That's the basis of your friendship.
It's like a Sammy Davis Jr. situation.
Yeah, exactly.
With Nixon. Mm-hmm. Remember when he was had his head on his shoulder and stuff like that, which he never was able to really live down.
No.
Like, Black people kind of
held that against him. Yeah.
To his dying day.
Totally did.
Yeah.
And so it's people who, because there are some, I still remember the meeting that, I think it was at Trump Tower, where Jim Brown was there, right? Jim Brown, who has, been a civil rights icon for a long time. And you would think, why is Jim Brown in the same company of Donald Trump? And I think what a lot of people in Herschel Walker's, a lot of Black people in Herschel Walker's position don't really understand is that if you were not considered by him and by people, in that circle to be a different kind of Black person, then you wouldn't be in that circle. It's something I call the Sal's Pizzeria syndrome. if you've seen Do the Right Thing,
Mm-hmm.
there's that scene in the movie with John Turturro and Spike Lee, and he's talking to Spike Lee. Somebody calls on the phone, and he picks up the phone, and he's frustrated with the call. And as soon as he hangs up, he calls them the N-word. Spike Lee pulls him aside and said, "Hey, how is it that you can call us that, but all your favorite entertainers are black people? You like Magic Johnson, you like Prince. You got famous black people on the wall there at Sal's Pizzeria." And John Turturro says, I mean, they're black, but they're not like black. And that's how Herschel Walker doesn't understand he's being viewed. It's like, oh, they know you're black, but to them, you're not black, meaning that you're not a black person who can't do anything for him. Find me a black friendship that Donald Trump has where they can't do anything for him. I'd love to see what it is. I'd love to see what that looks like. Even having the Kentucky Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, there to speak. Does he think he would have that platform if he had brought charges against Breonna Taylor's killers?
Taylor, yeah.
He would not be there. The reason he is there is because he hasn't brought those charges and because he's been a Trump supporter who is seen as somebody who can do something for Donald Trump.
Right. And once again, a person he could ridicule. Here's this black guy who's not going to charge these cops for killing Breonna Taylor in a no-knock search warrant.
Mm-mm.
You know, and I've interviewed this rapper named Turk, who had one of these no-knock search warrants happen at his house. He ended up shooting one of the cops, thinking it was a home invasion. You know what I'm saying? He ended up going to prison and so forth. But, you know, this whole concept of we're just going to bust into a house, not knowing who's in there, not knowing if there's children, if there's women, if it's even the right house. Because I heard a story recently about a no-knock search warrant into the wrong house.
You would think that the liability behind a no-knock warrant would be enough not to ever have a no-knock warrant. Because, again, if you don't know, there's so much, not misinformation, but there's so much that they don't know when they do these things. It would just seem like a walking disaster all the time. But as we, have found out with not just Breonna Taylor's case, but like so many other cases, is that as long as the police have qualified immunity, as long as they are not held liable personally for the things that they do, then their reckless behavior has no checks and balances. And, the people who still continue to make excuses for what the police do, I encourage them to think about this from just a fiscal standpoint, because there's a lot of people who consider themselves to be fiscal conservatives. Look at the amount of lawsuits cities have to settle for reckless police behavior. It's absurd. That's taxpayer money. Mm-hmm. That's money you're paying for somebody else to be bad at their job. So at the very least, from that standpoint, that should be enough for you to want more accountability. You would think that's a very easy argument to sell. The reason it isn't is because who the police often hurt. Because I guarantee you, if they go recklessly no-knocking on some white people's door and invading white people's houses, it'd be an entirely different landscape for how this is looked at. If we had a bunch of videos of white people having somebody else's knee on their neck, or of white people being shot in the back 7 times, this wouldn't even be a discussion. The police would have been reformed and reimagined a long time ago. But as always, it's about who this cruelty is for. That has been at the center of why it is allowed to persist. Because it's us, because we matter less, because brown people matter less, then people are okay with how the police behave. It's the same thing with COVID-19. Once people figured out who was dying and who was being disproportionately affected, then everything wants to be reopened. Then it's okay for schools to reopen and for schools and businesses and all that to be reopened, because they know that the people most likely to be sacrificed is us, because we're on the front lines. We're the essential workers in this country. So I shouldn't even be surprised anymore that this level of cruelty and inhumanity, Black people once again find themselves subjected to.
Well, the white couple that pointed guns at the protesters are actually speaking at the RNC. And someone pointed out that Candace Owens is not. After everything she's done against Black people.
Look,
put down, supported the police shooting George Floyd.
Yeah.
Claimed it was his own fault. Every line that she's crossed in the Black community, she still could not get a slot at the RNC.
It just goes to show you that no matter how many boots you lick, at the end of the day, that they are only going to see you as a useful tool for stupidity. And now that, they appear to be not as invested in her, I guess you can maybe read that into it from her lack of appearance there. Same thing with Diamond and Silk. It's like,
right.
Suddenly it's like, that's the way it goes. It's like, you've done all the tap dancing that they want you to do. And now it is what it is.
When we had our interview last time, you had just left SportsCenter. And a couple of interviews happened after that regarding that. Well, Michael Smith did an interview where he said that, his SportsCenter, job with you, it failed because it was a bad fit, just a bad fit. You read that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with what he said. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I really wish we could have eased the viewer into what we were actually trying to do. This was an interview in The Athletic.
Mm-hmm.
What was your take on that statement?
Mike is right. I mean, it was very clear in the beginning before our first show aired that there was going to be some creative differences. I thought that I think we both thought this. We both were very optimistic that we could work out and iron out those creative differences. But I think the way we hit the viewer was just probably a little bit too shocking, particularly since, unlike most of the other SportsCenter anchors you see, they've been in the SportsCenter ecosphere for a while. Like, we were coming over from a completely different planet than SportsCenter. I mean, we were on ESPN2. We were on in the midday. There are things you can do during midday on ESPN2 that don't actually work at 6 p.m. when you're on ESPN. And I think we were rushed onto air. We did not have enough time to figure out what the show was about, or what should be the foundation, of the show besides Mike and I. And I think everybody's heart was in the right place. Like, none of the group that established the Six went into this with the idea we would fail. Nobody did. We all had the best intentions, but we also had much different ideas about how we could win. And we were rushed on air, and we were so counter to what people had seen at 6 o'clock that there was an automatic rejection. It didn't help that we had a marketing campaign that didn't sell the show. The marketing campaign sold us as personalities, which is to be expected, but it also communicated to viewers our show wasn't actually about sports. And it was about sports. I still remember the campaign. The campaign was movies, music, and more. We were not Entertainment Weekly. We were not giving people movie reviews. We were not, giving people album reviews. That wasn't what the show was about. We had done plenty of viral things in the pop culture space, but even when we did those things, those were always extracurriculars. Those were always small additions, small tangents. They were never the basis for our show. And because we didn't sell the sports part of it, that this is a sports show, yeah, it looks different. It's with two people that you may not be as familiar with, but this is ultimately about sports, that, we were kind of set up for failure before we even started.
Well, in our last interview, the one clip that did the best, it's almost 1 million views, is when you said that Michael Smith turned you down for a date to play Madden.
That's funny. I did think I was like, oh, he's a cool guy or whatever. I was like, I've never been to Boston. We should exchange information. So we exchanged information. I called him, and I was just like, what's there to do around here? Like, yeah, let's go out and hang. And he's like, I don't really hang out much. I just kind of go to work. And so he's not picking up on any signal. I'm like, dude, just ask me out so we could go out and hang, and I could, maybe get to know you a little better. And then he told me that he was busy that night because he was playing Madden, and he had just put the Cardinals on franchise mode.
Okay.
And that's why I was like, now see, God is he's working a wonder in my life. This is not an avenue to be pursued at all. So that
He
was
chose Madden over you.
He chose Madden. It's true. He chose Madden in terms of instead of hanging out with me. So
okay. Did Michael reach out to you after the interview aired?
No, well, it's a story Mike and I have told 1,000 times.
Oh, okay.
I mean, and look, we both of us put a little bit more sauce on it than needs to be, right? He's happily married. I'm happily married. When we met, I don't know if he met his wife yet or not. He may have. I'm not sure. I feel like he hadn't met her yet. It was just always funny to us that the origination, I guess, of us meeting was that people thinking that we needed to be a couple.
Well, speaking of video games, John Sally, who I guess is cool with you as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
He's spoken highly of you. It kind of started with a conversation based on the Chuck D interview, where Chuck D felt that MTV extended the teenage years to 35. That before MTV, when you turned 18, you were expected to go buy a house, get a job, possibly get married. You're an adult, you're a man, or you're a woman. You're no longer a child. But once MTV came out and all this kind of happened, the laws, I mean, not the laws, but the perceptions kind of changed. And John Sally took it one step further. He felt that video games are the main reason why you have 40-year-old, quote unquote, boys who still live with their mothers and play video games all day and don't really take this level of responsibility. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, I disagree with that. I mean, I think it's a little bit more complicated. You do see people living at home longer now, or not as independent as I think my generation remembers. Like when I turned 15, I went to get my driver's permit, right?
Yeah, me too.
Right away. Turned 16, immediately went to get my license. And I commonly run into young people who are like 20, 21 and don't even have their driver's license, which I'm astounded at, right? But they also have Uber and Lyft, which I didn't have. Like the only way you were getting around, if you were even lucky enough to have access to a car, was if you had to go and get your license. And I think we were raised by a generation of parents who believed that at 18, you had to do something. Go to school to get a job. You definitely getting out the house.
Yeah.
The next generation of parents, which I guess would be sort of my generation loosely, they're just not as vigilant as that. And there's also the fact that it's much more expensive to live now than it was then.
Yeah, houses are a lot more expensive
than
when my parents bought a house. Yeah.
Houses are more expensive. College debt has people staying at home longer.
True.
And look, while I wouldn't even pretend that if I were single, I would want to date somebody who played video games, but it's a much different relationship for me than it is for a woman that's younger than me. You know, first of all, you can make a living playing video games now. That didn't exist.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's the reason why you have older, you have 35, 40-year-olds still playing video games, but video games are like way cooler than they've ever been. So I can understand being attached to them longer. But just because you play video games, that doesn't mean that you're somehow unable to balance being a productive citizen. Like a lot of the guys that I know who still play video games, they're professionals. Like they have jobs, they have 9-to-5s, they go to work, they make money. But when they come home, they have this awesome video game chair and, they like to play. They're like Steve Carell in 40-Year-Old Virgin. Steve Carell had a job, okay? He had a job.
He had a retail job at
right, he had
Best
a retail
Buy,
job.
but,
Yeah, but he was working, just saying. But I just think in general, to some degree, the young people, in this way, they definitely differ from us. I don't think they're as in a hurry to be adults and to live in this real world scenario. I mean, we sort of were rushing to be adults and rushing to have our license and get our own place and do all those things. And I don't think they feel the same impetus to do it.
That's too bad. That's too bad.
It is.
Because I moved out at 18 and I never went back.
I was like, I moved out at 17. I mean, that's because my birthday wasn't until December. So I didn't turn 18 till my freshman year in college. When I left for college and never came back.
Yeah.
Right? Like going back wasn't an option. Yep. But I do think the approach to parenting was a lot different too. It's like the generation of parents that I grew up with and my mother's friends and they were the same. They made you want to leave the house because they were so strict on you, and you had to live by their rules. they wanted you to be sick of that shit so that when you turn 17 or 18, you would leave. Parents today, they are a little softer, you know? They don't, I mean, I see some of my friends and how they are with their kids, and I'm astounded at what they can get away with. And, you know, that's because I think there's just a different relationship. It's a different generation.
Well, you did an interview with Sports Illustrated in July. You know, you talked about Sports Center and so forth, but you also talked about Colin Kaepernick. And I guess he had reached out to you before he agreed to do business with Disney.
Correct.
So before that point, what was your relationship with Kaepernick?
You know, Colin and I, it's funny because our stories wind up being kind of slammed together. And I think it was, you know, obviously he was in the news way before I was because of the protest that he started in 2016. And the president attacked him several times. I mean, he became a political talking point. And then fast forward, you know, a year after his protest, I get into my own trouble with Trump. Colin was one of the first athletes who publicly supported me during that time. And because I was very vocal about how he was treated unfairly by the NFL, about being blackballed, about him being blackballed, and just always trying to remind people the reason he was protesting, which were examples were littered throughout society, and to remind people of why he was protesting and what he said about these protests. You know, I was one of the more vocal and visible supporters of Colin. And so the few times we had run into each other in public spaces, like we were at an awards ceremony together where he was being honored and I also was being acknowledged. And it was all love. You know, I talked to his mom and, you know, his lovely girlfriend, Nessa, and him. And, you know, it's great. It's one of those things where what's understood need not to be said. Like we had a mutual respect without having to communicate all that often. And so when he called me, I was really surprised. You know, I had been in communication with his girlfriend here and there, but I was still very surprised that he called because, you know, Colin Kaepernick does not have to factor me into any decision that he makes in life, period. Like this is I'm a speck on his radar for the most part. But because of the way that he's built and because of his principles, what he didn't want to do is engage in a business relationship with a company that in his mind had not supported a Black woman that deserved that support. You know, people are always questioning whether or not he's in it for real. No, he's in it for real. And I'm not just saying that because he called me. I would have said that regardless. I am not surprised he's the type of person to do that, even though I was surprised to get that phone call. So when he called me, he wanted to know what happened between me and ESPN. He wanted to know the details, or as much as I would be willing to share with him, so that he knew what he potentially might be getting into, or if it was a warning signal for him that maybe these aren't the kind of people that I really want to be involved with. And I was honest, but I was also fair. And I felt like the opportunity to work with Disney and ESPN gave him a really unique chance to do something culture changing. It's not that many opportunities that you get that can change the culture of a place, but he is going to get that opportunity. And I thought that was the most important thing that needed to happen and continue at ESPN and Disney, is that they need culture disruptors, and he's one.
Well, you guys are working on a docuseries on his life.
Correct.
And are you narrating it or just
No,
producing
I'm not
it, or?
narrating. I'm producing.
Okay. Producing it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm producing. So, I mean, right now, it's still, well, of course, we know there will be a docuseries, but, you know, still putting all the parts together and the pieces together and everything. So everything is still in its infancy stages, but I'm excited about it because, you know, as somebody who has been a commentator throughout his protest, his blackballing, throughout this whole last 4 years, it still is astounding to me the amount of misinformation and purposeful mischaracterization of why he did what he did. As a journalist, you live to be a part of chronicling history. And this gives me an opportunity to do that and do it the right way. Do it in a way that when generations look back and see this docuseries, they'll know what really happened and not the sanitized version that everybody wants them to hear.
Right, because a lot of the detractors of Colin Kaepernick, the one thing they do say, and I could somewhat agree to this, is that yes, he does tweet every so often, but he's not very vocal. He doesn't speak publicly on video, at events, or whatever else. He's relatively silent 99% of the time. And with your relationship with him, do you understand why that is?
I do. I understand. So here's the thing is that sometimes with people, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Because if he's out there speaking all the time, I'm sure those same people who are wondering why he doesn't speak would accuse him of using his fame, his status to gain more acclaim. They would accuse him of being self-serving if he was too out there. And I don't think he wants to look like he's profiting necessarily from what he's done. Obviously, some financial opportunities have come his way as a result.
Right.
But he's trying to funnel those opportunities to, employ, uplift, amplify Black creatives. He's using some of the resources that he's now been able to get to do the awesome charity work that he's doing through the Know Your Rights camp that he's in charge of, his Know Your Rights organization. He's working with young people. He's working with incarcerated folks. He's working with the homeless. I mean, he's about the real work. And in his mind, that's all the talking he needs to do. Now, that's not to say that at some point he won't talk. I believe that he will, that at some point he won't share some of his experiences. But I think for him, he feels uncomfortable with the focus being on him, even though obviously he can't avoid that. Even when he doesn't talk, it is on him. But I think he would feel uncomfortable centering himself that way. Because for sure, I know he would have been criticized if he had been a continual vocal voice throughout this entire time.
Well, Marcellus Wiley, who's been on my show a few times now, he's always been somewhat of a critic of Kaepernick. And we talked about the whole workout situation.
Right.
It ended up being kind of a fiasco.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, he got the NFL workout, but then he wanted to change locations, and then he wanted a Nike camera crew there, and so forth. And ultimately, it resulted in nothing.
Right.
For anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And Marcellus's stance on this is that Colin says he wants to play for the NFL, but he doesn't really want to play for the NFL. He is more concerned with going down as a symbol, which he's going to go down as that regardless at this point. But had he really wanted to play for the NFL, he would not have taken those steps in that workout.
So I think reluctantly, because of timing, he didn't necessarily want to do it just like that. But then you got to strike while it's hot, and you got an opportunity. You got to go shoot your shot. What happened then is his lawyers got a hold of what this contract was like, I don't know, Cap, this doesn't sound like it's all in favor of you getting the workout to the degree that you think or you want or we desire. And I think that moment of contention is where it all fell apart. It's crazy that Cap wanted the cameras in there so that the public would be able to see the workout and they couldn't manipulate the footage or manipulate the workout so that we will be the referees or the scorekeepers. But we're not the employers. So I don't give a damn how many Twitter comments I write about Kaepernick. That ain't going to force one of these owners or team GMs to sign him. So I always kind of looked at that as suspicious. Like, why would you fight so hard for that? Or more importantly, why were you so upset if they said no to that? Because it doesn't really matter if you need an opportunity, but whatever.
So I love Marcellus dearly, but as somebody who is in the league, he knows what a real workout looks like. Right? A real workout doesn't happen at a high school in Georgia, regardless of who set it up. A real workout happens at the team facility.
Well, wasn't it originally at the team facility and he wanted to change it to the high school?
No, I don't think it was. I didn't think it was. Was it?
I think that's what happened.
But it wasn't the Falcons who brought him in, though. It was just, they were just literally using his grounds, right? And they were going to invite they invited all these different scouts.
Right.
And they did it on, I feel like it was a Tuesday They did it on some kind of midweek where, I mean, the possibility of a number of scouts from the NFL showing up on this particular day was not going to happen. So anyway, I say all that to say is that the setup of what the NFL proposed was a sham from the beginning. Players aren't usually set up. This is not the setup in which players are acquired. You know, the closest he came to there even being something close to legitimate interest is what happened with the Seahawks, right? It's like that was probably about the closest thing where, you know, you have the head coach and whoever else express interest. They talk about bringing him into the facility, putting him through a workout. None of that ever happened. No team has ever offered him a contract. No team has brought him into a team facility because that's usually how that works. Tryouts aren't set up for an individual player through the league. That's like, it's not done that way. The NFL doesn't do that. So to me, there was already some red flags about what this was really about. The scouts, the team owners, the coaches, they have had Colin Kaepernick's number for years. They know where he is. All right. If they were really that interested in him, they wouldn't put him through something like what they were proposing. And then people expected him to fully trust the league when they had just been in court battling over a grievance. So he's going to leave this entire workout in their hands. He's going to allow the league to send their version of edited footage to the teams. Like, why should he trust the NFL? I don't blame him for making sure this was done on his terms. And again, all of these team owners have had the liberty of working on Colin Kaepernick whenever they wanted. The truth is, they're not serious about doing it. They don't want to give him an opportunity to come in the league because they still look at him and blame him for the reason that they became or they got caught in the political crossfire of Donald Trump. They blame him for that. And I think they're also on a deeper level, another reason why they wouldn't really give Colin an opportunity in the NFL is that they're worried about the influence that he would have on other players. This isn't just about the awareness that he can bring to the issues that he cares about, or even the media circus that might ensue if he were on another team. This isn't about that. They've dealt with plenty of guys who have created media circuses and they've managed to go on and operate as a normal functioning team. They're worried about how somebody who is as liberated as Colin Kaepernick is, the influence he's going to have on other guys. The NFL, football in general, is a sport of conformity. It's not a sport of individualism.
Yep.
And he would be a problem in their minds. He's a problem. They can't manage. They can't control. That's why they don't want him in the NFL. He's become too big, right? And so everything they do with him would have to be carefully managed because they'd be worried about the perception of everything and they don't want to deal with it. And they don't want to possibly have somebody on a roster who might have more power than the brand of the NFL.
Right, because in December, Roger Goodell says the NFL has moved on from Kaepernick after the whole workout situation. But then recently, Goodell said he wishes the NFL would have listened to Kaepernick sooner. So it's a total 180.
Roger Goodell is insincere. The NFL has had every opportunity to make this right. And their unwillingness to do so really speaks to how they felt all along. They didn't stand up for him when he was being attacked during his protests. They didn't stand up for him when the president continued to attack and bash him. They decided that Donald Trump's approval meant more to them than Colin Kaepernick's job. It's just that simple. And the owners, many of which who are Trump supporters, sided with the president. And as much as they might want to undo that history, they never will. They made their choice. And now he has to sit in it. And all it took for them is just to have the courage to stand up. And I judge people not by what they do when it's convenient. I judge them by what they do when it's inconvenient. And the NFL already showed who they are. So like whatever Roger Goodell says now is just disingenuous to me because, and not only that, he's a convenient fall guy in this issue because you know who you don't see on camera are the owners. Those are the ones who ultimately control whether or not Colin Kaepernick gets back in the league. You don't see them on camera saying that they thought it was a mistake. You only see Roger Goodell because that's what he's paid to do. because he works for them, not the other way around. He has literally no say-so into whether Colin Kaepernick ever gets a job in the NFL, but he's convenient to trot out there and make people believe there's some kind of sincere remorse on the NFL's part, and there just isn't.
Right, because you have your own history with the owners of the NFL. When you're talking about Jerry Jones, when I guess he threatened to bench any player who does anything to disrespect the flag, you felt that advertisers should boycott the Dallas Cowboys.
No, what I felt was, when I made those comments, which is what got me suspended, the pressure I was applying to was the fans. So after Jerry Jones said that he would bench or cut any player that would take a knee during the anthem, a lot of fans, Black fans, were saying that the players should stand up to Jerry Jones, that they should, that he was humiliating them and disrespecting them by saying something like that. Of which I said to many of these fans was, why are you putting so much pressure on the players? Why are you forcing them to give up something that they've worked for their whole life? You know, the easiest way that if you want to make your opinion known about this issue is if you stop watching football. That's really what it takes. It's like, you guys can apply as much pressure to Jerry Jones and the Cowboys in the NFL, more pressure than the players can. So why are you forcing them to leverage their careers when you won't even do something as simple as not watch on a Sunday? Between the two of those, what's easier? Probably you shutting off your remote. That's probably changing the channel. That's a lot easier than asking a guy who spent the last 10 or 12 years of his life trying to be a professional football player to all of a sudden walk away from that and millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars at the very least that help support his family. It has worked since the beginning of time, which is economic boycotts work. They just do.
Right. Because in 2020, the NBA actually approved protest messages on jerseys, which the NFL is not going to do.
Never. I mean, look.
But the NBA is actually trying to get in front of this.
Well, but it's a much different relationship between the, Adam Silver and the NBA players. It's just a different relationship between the owners and the players. The players have more power in the NBA. They have guaranteed contracts. You poke the bear with them, they might walk away, all right? And they got money behind them to do so. They make more money. Their careers last longer than the NFL. The NFL looks at its players as being disposable. So to them, they think, one of you protest, I have another one in here next week that'll fill your spot. Like, they have no problem sending that message. And so they've already sent the message effectively by what happened to Colin Kaepernick. They blackballed him from the league, for standing up for humanity, for standing up for his people, for standing against police violence. That's what it's going to say in the history books, no matter how many times they try to rewrite it and make it seem like it's going to be a different way. The truth is that you have a much better chance of playing in the NFL if you hit a woman than you do if you stand up for injustice. Much better chance. That's proven, right? So they have already communicated to the players what you will lose if you decide to go against us. And even though they're saying that if players decide to protest during the national anthem, that they would stand in support, I believe that on some level because they've already made it known that's what they plan to do, or we think that's what they plan to do. And many players have said that they plan to protest, but they still can't be trusted because, again, I look at what they did when it wasn't convenient. And when it wasn't convenient to support Colin Kaepernick, they didn't support him. So if I were an NFL player, if they're expecting the NFL to have their back or to somehow try to work with players so that they can make their voices heard, I think they'd be foolish to trust them.
Right, because I just interviewed Andre Rison yesterday. And unfortunately, he's known these days because of that ESPN 30 for 30 broke, which, interestingly enough, when they were doing that documentary, they weren't telling everyone that it's going to be called Broke. They were just doing it because everyone would have walked out.
Yeah.
Andre Rison in our interview talked about how he's given away like $6 million over the course of his life. His family, his friends, aspiring musicians, and so forth. And as I was watching this documentary, one of the guys in the documentary, he was, I believe, a coach, said something so interesting, it really kind of messed me up. He said, when it comes to professional sports, you don't have a career, you have an opportunity. because unlike a career, you don't know if it's going to end the next day. Think about it. You're in the league, you're on a team, you think your position is good, you wake up the next morning, you're cut. You're in practice, you hurt your knee, it's over. They think you're too old, they whatever, some new hot players coming out of college, it's done. And something like 78% of football players either file for bankruptcy or are under very heavy financial duress within 2 years of retiring. These are shocking numbers. And this could be applied to entertainment in general. Whether you're an actor, whether you're a rapper or a singer, you don't know when it's going to end. It's not really a career. You just are lucky enough to be in this position. And I just don't think many players really realize this.
I think, and then especially we're talking about Black athletes, then add the additional component that most of them, this is the first time they've seen generational wealth.
Yep.
Or the possibility of it. And they don't have anybody in their family who can tell them what to do when you make this kind of money.
Yeah.
They have no model, right?
Yeah.
So they're just winging it. They're just learning as they go. And so what you find is that even though we know the money doesn't last forever, the players treat it like it lasts forever. They act as if they're going to be making the same income for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And that's not true at all. I mean, they don't understand they're a depreciating asset the moment that they become a professional athlete. Really, it starts before then, but I'll just stick to when they're actually paid for their services. They're a depreciating asset from that time. They can only get worse, right? I mean, they'll have a brief period where they'll have their primes and they'll experience success, hopefully. But most NFL careers last 3 to 5 years. And so if you come out the gate spending the money like you're going to make it 20 years, then you're going to probably be hit with some very harsh, financial realities. I mean, it's as a sports reporter, you get to, sometimes witness how these guys spend money. And it's amazing when you see them just blowing 30 or 40 grand in a strip club or, and I remember I had this conversation with a professional athlete. I forget who it was because otherwise I tell you, but I asked him, when's the last time somebody bought you dinner? And he couldn't even remember because he's always the one forced with picking up the tab.
Andre Rison had an entourage of 40 people.
And ain't none of them other
grown men, adults,
yeah,
who he would feed like they were his children and fly him out and put him in hotel rooms as if they were his kids.
But this is the hard part for Black athletes, is that they are really stuck between two worlds. It's the world they came with. It's the world they came from. These are the people for them that have held them down when they didn't have the ability to pay dinner for everybody. They feel a twisted sense of loyalty to them. These are also the people who, if they tried to create some distance, would tell them, oh, you've changed. Oh, you're not the same person.
Yeah.
So many of us feel a lot of pressure to stay connected. And that's not to say that everybody that you came up with, that you have to immediately distance yourself from. That's not what I mean. It's just that you're gonna have people that are in your life who really are only there for what you can give them. And you gotta weed those people out. Even if it means to other people, it looks like you're turning your back on folks. Because regardless of how they may have supported you, you're the one with the talent. You're the one with the most to lose, not them. So you have to treat yourself in that way. And so it's just sad when you see so many of them talk about how they have just unconditionally given money to people, just because they felt that survivor's remorse. They were the ones who got the lottery ticket and they feel guilty about it rather than treating it as something that they deserve. And it's not their responsibility to fund their whole family.
Yeah, and as someone who's had money, lost it, and then had it again, you really need experience on how to handle
100%.
Large amounts of money. It was interesting. I read a story recently that, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle bought like a $14 million house in like Santa Barbara or something like that. And I'm like, So I started looking into it, and the royal family, they have serious money, right? For the whole family, all the children. And I actually went back into history and looked. The first quote unquote king of England was like the year 800. This family has had 1,200 years of being rich to figure out how to manage their money. A lot of us are, new rich.
Oh,
I've only had money for the last, 5-10 years, like not even 10 years, maybe about 8 years. The first time I had it, I messed it all up. I bought a house I couldn't afford. I bought a Benz. I did that. And then suddenly the economy dropped and then I was screwed. And you have to learn how to handle money and incrementally bigger amounts of money.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
you have to know, like, you have to be able to how to keep a couple $1,000s in your bank account, and then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and then you got to build it up to the millions. If you go from dead broke to millions of dollars, this is why you have these guys who buy like 4 Ferraris, and and
well, they don't know about investing.
They don't know about investing. They don't know about the stock market. They don't really understand how property works, because your family will be like, buy the biggest house you can, because you'll never lose money on property. Someone already, you always have to have a place to live.
You always have a place to live.
I hate that.
Yeah.
I don't own any property. I literally do not own any property. I have 3 places I pay rent on every month, but that's okay.
Because you still know how to generate.
Because I've made all my money in the stock market.
Correct.
Because you see what I'm saying? But
no, I it's funny you say that, because I'm so grateful that, when my first year in journalism, I made $22,000 a year. I didn't see my first 7-figure check till 2016, right? So that's 4 years ago. And I remember, and it wasn't in the form of the check, or I should say, I remember when it was deposited into my account, I think I just stared at it for a good 30 minutes, because I could not believe that this was my life, that I had been paid that much money. And it was harrowing. It was actually very scary, because granted, I mean, I had a 401k. I knew about the stock market. I knew about those things, but it just puts you in a really weird space, because you sort of, especially if you're Black, because I think we constantly live with what I like to call broke PTSD, right? Like, I grew up on welfare, raised by a single mother. I mean, we didn't have a whole lot. We had just enough, is what I would say. So to go from that, and even though it's happening, 30, 40 years later, that didn't even make me more well-equipped to deal with it. And so I can imagine if you're LeBron James, you're 18 years old, and you get a $98 million deal with Nike. Like, that's numbers I can't even contemplate.
Yeah.
At 18, God knows what I might have done with that kind of money. But, when I remember my agent cussed me out, because playfully, but dead serious, because I bought my mother a brand new Benz, and he was like, he was like, well, you leased it, didn't you? I was like, no, I didn't lease it. He was like, so you bought it? You just gonna have some payments? I was like, no, I paid cash for it. And he was like, what are you doing? He was like, it's a car, it's a depreciating value. Like, he goes through all this. He was right. But I had to tell him, I was like, look, this is what you gotta understand about Black folks, right? Especially my mother is of a certain age. You cannot hand a 60-something-year-old Black woman keys to a brand new Benz and tell her there's a note. She's gonna worry to death about this note. And that she wouldn't have even been the one paying it. But it's just the simple fact of, if she thinks that it's gonna cost me money, that I'm gonna have to pay on something every month, it's not gonna go over well. I was like, I have to hand her something she fully owns, because then she knows it's real, all right? And so it was, and I was like, hey man, our relationship with money is different. I mean, it's much different.
Yeah, no, I mean, look at Meek Mill's biggest song, Dreams and Nightmares intro, where he said, when I pulled up in that Ferrari, y'all thought it was leased. And I'm like looking at my leased Tesla going like, what the hell's wrong with the leased car?
Right?
What's wrong with y'all right now? Like, y'all tripping. Like
okay.
somehow if the Ferrari's leased, it's not really your
That's
Ferrari.
not
Like you can't really drive it the way you want to drive it. Like it's like you're renting it for the weekend. No, it's the same thing. In fact, you talk to any rich person and they all lease their cars.
It's true.
Really?
No, rich people
Dead
lease their
ass.
car. And I didn't, again, me paying cash. It didn't make it worse. I paid cash for my car and he was like, I'm done with you, basically. I'm trying to tell
Because you don't really feel like it's yours if it's leased, right?
I don't feel
it's
like
crazy.
It's
crazy.
Feel like,
yeah.
I feel like, if that note is hanging over my head and something happens, whatever that something in my mind might be, and I'm not making this money, then they can come get this car. I need it paid off, so I know I always have it. So at the very least, if I'm on my knuckles, I could sell it.
Yeah, you gotta, And that's the thing. It takes generational learning to sort of unlearn some of these sort of silly preconceived notions that aren't really based on reality. Because, you lease the car, the payments are lower, you could write it all off through your business, and then you could take whatever money you didn't spend on that and invest it in stocks or even real estate or even a business that might actually make you money, unlike your car. I think like Trick Daddy said that if you look at your closet in your driveway and you see more money than in your bank account, you're a damn fool.
It's the truth. It's the truth. Magic Johnson told me this story once that I have never, forgotten, in talking about how you got to learn from things. And he told me the story of how when he was, because he left Michigan State after 1 year. And so he's at the point now where he's turning pro and he's trying to decide about what shoe company to go with. And there was these young upstarts from Nike.
Yeah, I've heard the story.
That came in and offered him stock. And he didn't know what stock was. And the idea that you would have money and it's something you can't see or touch or you can't look at was just so foreign to him. And then there was Converse. And Converse was definitely at that time the more popular shoe among basketball players. So it just made more sense with Converse offering him this bonus check right there. Like, I'm going where the money is. I see this money. It's in the form of a check. Forget about the stocks and bonds. And so, of course, Nike becomes Nike, and the amount of stock they were offering him, look, Magic might have hit that billion mark already, right? Especially because I'm sure he would have continued to invest.
Yeah.
And, he told me every time he walks past the Nike store or sees one, a little piece of his soul dies because he knows that how much that might have possibly been worth. But those are the lessons that you learn. Unfortunately, when you don't have a lot of financial literacy, which a lot of us, when we come into that sudden rush of money, we don't have.
Yeah, I agree. Jemele Hill, always a pleasure. Congrats on the new show.
Thank you.
And the new podcast.
Appreciate it.
And of course, you still have the Spotify
I do.
podcast.
I still have the Spotify
you still got the gig at the Atlantic.
Yep. I got about 62 jobs now.
62 jobs, man. Like the Heyman family from Living Color. Exactly.
I got 3 jobs.
Right. Well, that's great, though. You're doing your thing. You've leveled up since last time. You're doing well. You're married now.
Yeah.
Seems like life is going well for you.
It is. I'm really blessed. And especially now, we're under this pandemic. It's a lot of people I know that's out of work. A lot of people don't know where the next check is from. And so I am amazed that I am just busier than ever. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. It kind of blows my mind right now.
Like my workday pre-pandemic, I thought was, fairly long, but it's like doubled. I mean, it is like not a moment's rest at all between people. Now, especially now that I'm sure you've had to do this because you guys were doing remote interviews. Didn't you do one?
We were always doing remote interviews. So when the pandemic hit, it was like, we've been doing this.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
2/3 of my interviews were done over FaceTime and remotely. We had already built the system. We had already known how, we already had our crews. We already had our studios and other places. So since I do the interviews all the time, but I'm never on camera, it gave me the flexibility already. So when the pandemic hit, it was like, oh,
this play right into
this is perfect for us.
Yep.
We could actually do a whole lot more. And we started figuring out different ways where people could do the same, high quality interviews from home by sending them like a certain
because I
type
think
of equipment and stuff like that.
Was because it was when your team first reached out, it was we're still sort of in the throes of it a little bit. And so I know that was an option they put on the table.
It was an option. Yeah. So look, I mean, life is going to change, and the environment is going to shift, and technology is going to transition and so forth like that. But as bad as things are right now, there are people that are making more money than ever.
Yep.
The billionaires are making more billions.
I mean, Jeff Bezos, holy crap.
The people that can adapt during this, once we get out of this, are all going to be wealthy.
Totally agree.
So as bad as everyone thinks it is right now, use it as an opportunity to actually grow a new business, to expand your business. You have an audience right now that's sitting at home that wants to be entertained, that wants to feel some semblance of humanity. And if you cater to that audience, you could build an audience you couldn't have built, in the regular world pre-COVID. So, think positively, expand. Jemele's doing it. I'm doing it. You could do it as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Peace.